So I had the opportunity to meet Karen back a month or two ago. We had a chat, and I realized that she is quite a dynamic woman, and she has a cerebral palsy, and including in addition to dyslexia. And somebody said to me, "Well, why are you going to have somebody with cerebral palsy talking at a polio group?" Because we have also one thing in common, and we have the fact that we have disabilities. And disability advocacy is something that Karen has been doing all her life. And we need to do more of it. There are so many things going on in the world where people with disabilities are being discriminated against. It's not going to end in our lifetime, and hopefully we can pass this on to the next generation so they will continue to stand up for people with disabilities and their human rights. So welcome, Karen. I want to, let's talk about telling us about yourself.
All right. Well, thank you for having me. This is a joy to me. It means the world. I want all of you to know that, and I feel so blessed to be here. It all started when I was 5 months old, actually. I was born perfectly normal, and at 5 months old, my mother gave me my first DPT shot, and I reacted to that, but I came back and I was okay. But when my mother took me to the doctor the next time for my second round, he would not listen to my mother. And she said, I had a reaction. Can you give the serum in smaller increments? And he just went right ahead and gave me the shot anyways. By morning, I ran a fever and I fell into a coma. And I was in a coma for 10 days. And the doctor said that I had 30% chance of living and that I was going to be deaf, dumb, and blind. That's how severe it was going to be. But I fooled them all and I made almost complete recovery. The only thing that was really off was my left side, and my face was distorted as well. One side was up and one side was down, and that straightened out eventually. But because of that shot, um, I can say it was really a blessing in disguise because it made me be who I am today. And I did everything that any other child would do. That's how wonderful my mother was. She was a progressive woman who listened deeply to her children and did whatever they needed. She was just like she was a powerhouse. She was wonderful. And if it wasn't for her, I wouldn't have the foundation that I have today, and I wouldn't be who I am today.
Well, what's interesting about that is our last speaker last month, Lois, and she was from Nigeria, kind of had the same message that her attitude started with her mother, and the critical role that a parents play with a person with disabilities at that very early stage. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, my mother, the earliest stories that I heard of my mother when I was a child growing up was that my mother had me in one arm. She did not drive in 1951. And she had me in one arm and all of her satchels in another arm. And she took the bus to Los Angeles Children's Hospital to give me therapy and to give me everything else that I needed. And that's where I was diagnosed at 18 months old with left side hemiplegia, cerebral palsy. They didn't know about my dyslexia until I went to first grade. And I could not retain the Dick and Jane books that the teacher was reading in class, but she knew that I was very smart. So, um, it started way back then, but I, I was, I was so into wanting to learn that I remember as a child, my first grade teacher, Mrs. Stevens, used to give my best girlfriend and I each other's last name because she knew that I was intelligent. Somehow she had a sixth instinct. And I would write her last name and my girlfriend would write hers. And we would start out every morning like that, writing our names on the board. But when it came to really remembering and getting the whole concept of a story, it was very difficult. And when I used to come home from school and I would tell my mama, as I affectionately call her, Mama Katie, she she knew something was wrong because one day she asked my sister what she saw on the envelope, and it was an envelope with a stamp. And what I saw was was a house with a window. And that's when it all began, when she knew something was wrong. And I would say, Mommy, I'm not understanding what Mrs. Stevens is saying. And they didn't have special education at that time. But I sat, I remember so intently to try to remember everything that I needed to remember. But it was like going in one ear and out the other. There was just no way.
Mhm.
Mhm.
So, and one thing that I found of interest was that you were with a cerebral palsy, were put in braces.
Yeah.
And at some point, let me tell you, have you talk about that, your approach to the braces.
Well, the brace. I only had one brace and it was
Okay.
all the way up to my thigh. And the braces started with Children's Hospital. And I remember at the earliest age, wearing a locked foot brace all the way up to my waist, to my thigh as a child and going to bed with it. And remember this heavy, heavy metal brace, me trying to lift my foot to turn to get comfortable at night. I couldn't, they wouldn't let me, use it to bend my knee at all. Not at all. But I did what I had to do and I did it with a smile.
At some point, you or your mother said, "I don't want to wear the braces anymore."
Well, actually, at age 11, it started when I was 3.5 years old. I wore my braces to dance class. I met my dance teacher. My mother found Al Gilbert. He was a well-renowned dance teacher who traveled all over the world. He was so wonderful. And he started my lessons the first day we met. He looked in my eyes, he cupped his hand in my hand, and he said, "We're going to do great." And he used to give me lessons with my leg brace on and also with my leg brace off so that I could learn to hop, skip, jump, and run. And he was the most wonderful person in my life. And through him, I learned that I wanted to dance, that more than dance, I wanted to follow his footsteps. and that I was going to do anything that I had to get better. That this was one joy in my life that I could take with me and use constructively, because my mother loved the arts. My mother, when she used to take me to my father's restaurant, used to take me over to UCLA, no, I'm sorry, USC, and take me to all of the concerts, ballet concerts, operas, musicals. There was not one thing that she didn't do for me. And my
So I think this kind of part of your story is important, because as it was with Lois's story last month, because the support that a child gets who has a disability, whether it be from a family member, and also it was your mother and also the dance instructor, that really started to form who you are or who you became in your later years. And the support, I think we have to think about that. The support we can give to children with disabilities is going to help them for the rest of their life.
That's right. He
So,
gave me self-confidence that I didn't know that I had. Through his love and devotion to me, he gave me he developed my self-worth by making me feel good about myself, by doing my shuffles, my shuffle ball changes, my shuffle hops. I couldn't even hop. And he said, he used to tell me all the time, I'm just making it like therapy, Karen. But it wasn't therapy. It was dance to me. It was like it was the best medicine that I could have, because the doctors were not.
right. So let's fast forward a little bit up until the point, because something dynamic happened at the point that you were trying to get into college. And at the same time, America in the United States, the ADA, American Disabilities Act, was happening. And so you became part of advocacy for that ADA. Can you explain what was happening in your college life?
In my college life, well, I had two, it goes back when I was 18 years old, actually. I went to my first California rehab session, and they labeled me mentally retarded then. And they set me off to go to a workshop every day. And I folded boxes with one hand for 6 months. And that changed my life forever, because I said, I know I'm better than this, and I know I can do more than this, and I'm not going to settle for anything less. And my voice kept developing throughout my years, because I started advocating for myself and helping other disabled children in my school when I was only like 5, 6, 7 years old. No, 7 years old. I had a girlfriend who had CP, where all her limbs were paralyzed, and she was a quadriplegic, and she had a speech impairment as well. And I used to help her. I used to push her. I used to turn the pages of the book for her. We became the best friends. So it started way back then. And, you know, the doctors wanted to do experimental surgery on me for my left hand. And if I didn't speak up to my mother and say, you know, mommy, I don't want that surgery. I do not want to be cut up. My left hand would actually be worse than it is today. It would be hanging like a pendulum. I wouldn't be able to control it. So the advocacy started then. And when I went to college, I already had one experience with them doing what they did to me and sending me away. They didn't think that I could hold a full-time job. And when I went on and I did carry a full-time job, and I wanted more for my life. I wanted to become a recreation director and a teacher. So I went back to California State Rehab in Santa Monica. And the counselor there said to me, how can a person with CP teach other people how to dance? Because you have to be a mirror and you have to use both arms. Well, that never was a problem for me because I learned from the best and I knew I could do it. And Al knew I could do it. And he always used to put me in front of the recital lines. He gave me not only private lessons, but he gave me extra lessons. And my mother would always take me to him, pick me up from school and take me to him. And that was a joy of my life. So when she told me that, and she says, you can only take 12 units a semester. And I knew that was not true. I knew that you could take as many classes as you wanted or as little classes as you wanted. I have an older sister. And she went to college. She's 4 years old, 3.5 years older than me. So I knew from personal experience. So I was very diplomatic and I smiled and I listened and I said, thank you very much. And I literally walked out of that office, sat in my car and cried like a baby. And I said, this is not happening to me again. This is not happening to me again. And I literally pulled myself up off of my bootstraps. And the next day I called the White House, Jimmy Carter, and I proceeded with calling every person in his cabinet until I got help. And that's where it all started.
But you, which is outstanding. It's outstanding. And it's interesting to talk to advocates like you because it starts to think about our own selves as advocates and what we can do. And one of the things certainly is the message that you're giving to us is that you never gave up. You never gave up. You never lost, regardless of people telling you no, 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 you kept saying yes, yes, yes.
Exactly. And I would never take no for an answer. That was part of the I can do message, is that if you told me I couldn't, I used to say to myself, I'll show you I can, to myself. And I used to take that person and I had that image in my mind and I'll say, I'll show you. But throughout the years and as I got older, I saw that I was showing myself that I could do anything that I put my mind towards doing. Anything.
Great, that's outstanding. So, but let's talk about that particular case that you took to court regarding the right to college.
Okay. Well, after writing to Jimmy Carter's cabinet and nothing happened, I called them up and I talked with the head person at OCR in Washington, D.C. and Office of Civil Rights. And so they said that they would get a person in touch with me, that I had a good chance to do what I wanted to do. And because I knew in my heart and soul that if I didn't learn to read and write, and if I didn't learn all the things that I didn't learn in grammar school and junior high and high school, because I was passed from one class to another for 12 years, never learning anything. And I was so motivated that I kept doing what I knew I needed to do. And that's putting all my effort into learning because I knew my mother was not going to be here for the rest of my life, or, I had to do something about it because I was not going to sit in my house, and rot in front of the TV watching Popeye the Sailor Man. There was no way that I was going to do that because I knew that I had more inside of me than everybody else was telling me. All these experts were telling me. And so I had to motivate myself. I knew in the pits of my gut that if I didn't do anything, that I would be put in an institution. And I did not want that for my life.
Okay, so you filed a case in court, and what was that case?
That case, the case was that I could open up the doors, help myself, and get my own education. That's what I was going for. I wanted to start by getting my AA first and then continuing on and getting more knowledge. And I had to wait 2 years. And the lawyer that I talked to said, well, you will either open the doors for everybody or you won't win this case at all and it will slam close in your face. And so I waited patiently, and almost 3 years later, I filed in 1976, and in 1978, I got word that I had won the case, the first civil rights case ever in the state of California.
And and a little detail what that case did. What did the winning the case accomplish?
Well, that case allowed me to go to college and get my AA degree. But at the end of my college, of getting my AA degree, which took 5 years, I had to once again, for a third time, go to my rehabilitation counselor, get another IQ test, and be labeled mentally retarded for a third time.
Wow.
And so I was never able to go on and get my BA or master's because I really wanted to get it in recreation and dance, and my AA in English, which I did, and I graduated with honors. But when that happened, because my mother was not a rich person, my father died when I was 14 years old, and my mother was left to raise 2 children and take care of a restaurant. So I knew that that was a hardship for my mother. And so I went back, and I took the test, and I was told that I was mentally retarded again. And I said, whether I have this degree or not, I will continue learning, and I will teach. I will teach without the degree, and I will take my classes, and I will learn. And I did do that because I was determined. I sat in a classroom when I was a little girl, when my mother confronted my elementary school and said, give Karen homework that Karen can do, because I came home with a homework assignment that I could not do by myself. And I remember my mother, her lipstick was in her purse right next to where she was doing my rollers at the time. And so that I could wear a flip. And she wrote in red lipstick, give Karen homework that Karen can do by herself. And she used to tell me all the time, would you rather be like your girlfriend whose mother does all the work for her? Or do you want to be able to learn for yourself? And that always stuck with me my entire life. And so, and I was embarrassed, I was humiliated, but that gave me something inside that when this last case, um, when they told me that I was mentally retarded for a third time at California rehab, I knew, I had to do something. And nobody could do it for me. I had to do it. And I started teaching. I started,
So, so Karen, so if I understand the case that you won, that people with disabilities were being discriminated against to go to college. So you made it a civil rights issue
under,
not to discriminate against people with disabilities. So that's the importance. It was good for you, but it also opened the doors for other people with disabilities.
exactly, under Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act.
Okay, that's important to know.
Yes.
And just to touch base really quickly on what you're talking about in the mental retardation in the United States, as far as I understand, if you score less than 70 on IQ test, you're going to be labeled as being mentally retarded. I assume in cerebral palsy is not does not impact the intelligence of a person. But I assume that you were scoring low because of your dyslexia, which is a learning disability, and that was causing you to give a low score on that. Just so, and I'm not going to get much into this, but IQ tests for particular kinds of disabilities is discriminatory.
It is,
Be-
and it doesn't measure anything.
Right, because of the fact that you don't necessarily learn properly, or because of the fact in Karen's case, she couldn't necessarily understand the test because of her dyslexia. She was being labeled as mentally retarded, which is not correct. She was not. So just so you know, understand that. So to move forward, then also you have done work on you're on the executive board of the Protection and Advocacy Inc. What is that?
That is an organization that helps people, um, oh, you know, move forward in their life. There's lawyers, there's people who sit on the board who have CP, who have all kinds of disabilities. And we would gather once a month, and there would be many things that we would have to, discuss about, like shock therapy was one of them when I was on the board. Uh, but we would deal with all different kinds of cases and people being able to move forward with their life and not be discriminated against. And now their name is called Disabilities Rights. They changed their name.
Okay, good. God bless you for doing that, being on that board, and God bless that organization for existing.
Yes.
Also, you've written a book, Karen, The Broken Hoof. Can you tell us about that book?
Well, I wrote that book, and it came out originally in 2005, and it's about my life and the people who helped me in my life in a form of a horse, Pegasus. And it has expanded to a full novel, and it will be coming out in a few months, maybe 2-3 months.
Right.
But it's taken over 40 years. And I started that book through my mentor when I was going to college. And he says, "Oh, Karen, why don't you enter this contest for Kaleidoscope Literary Prose magazine?" So I did, and I'm thinking, "Oh, I'm never gonna to win," but I did it anyways. And I came up with this thing because we used to walk, and I used to have to constantly um, go over the material in college that I was learning to read to be able to retain it. So one day we were walking by Santa Monica Pier where the Hippodrome is, and I said, I know what I'm going to write about." So I wrote the story, or I wrote a paragraph, and I won second prize. And I was so surprised because I just like, I wrote it and I forgot about it. And I said, if I win, I win. If I don't, I don't. And this was like a dream come true because I couldn't even write a sentence when I graduated high school. I always wrote with run-on sentences. And to see that I could write like anybody else, or me with dyslexia could write a story. It's like that was the that was a huge accomplishment for me.
Excellent. I have a couple of other questions, and then we'll open it up to the group for questions.
Okay.
But I'm going to read a quote that I saw that you said, and maybe you can explain it.
Okay.
It says, "You are forever linking achievement with struggle and wasting precious energy getting around stereotypes and prejudice." Well, what do you mean by that?
Well, all my life, I put my positive energy forward to do what I had to do. And there were people slamming the doors in my face and, oh no, you'll never be able to do this and you'll never be able to do that. And it was like I had to learn how to navigate this world and the people in that were coming into my circle with a dignity and a respect and a way to communicate what it is that I needed and what it is that I was going through. And so that energy really made me feel as though I had to take and learn how to accept what other people were saying, but not give up on myself. And if it was positive, that was great. If it wasn't, well, I had to go back to the drawing board and I had to keep going and I had to keep moving forward. And I really had to learn how to live in this world and take the good with the bad and really face life for what life was, because nobody was going to pat me on the side and go, oh, you're a sweet little girl. We're going to make everything all right for you. They weren't. And my mother used to tell me that all the time.
I know, I think that's a good ending to this question and answer phase, and I'm going to turn it back to you. Thank you, Karen. I really appreciate your advocacy, and you've been an advocate since it sounds like you were 6 years old. So um, interesting what it takes to become an advocate.
Oh, Karen, with your million-watt smile, it does not surprise me that we're sitting here and listening and watching you. For all of us, there's some part of your story that resonates. And when I think back to your mom saying to the doctor, please don't give her this next shot the way you did, and being discounted, it really starts so early, and it runs throughout all of our lives. I mean, you knew that long leg brace was wrong. You just knew it. You couldn't sleep the way you wanted to. You were not comfortable. And all they wanted to do was immobilize your knee, and I go back to all of these moments when we're not listened to. And so look, you had to work 3 times harder to make sure that you got rid of that brace. So from ages 3 to 11, you really struggled, every single day because nobody would listen to you. And the thought that, and it's true, if you open the door for yourself, you've opened it for everybody who comes after you. And you advocate for yourself, and a doctor listens to you, and then they learn from that everybody that comes in that door after you deserves to be heard. So I'm very moved by everything you said, and it does not surprise me that, you are who you are today, because that really, everything you did added up to who you are today. But boy, we have to fight against the people who don't hear us and don't listen and don't acknowledge. So I'm very moved by all of this today. So Mazel Tov. It was just perfect. It was just perfect. Do we have any hands up? Anybody else who wants to ask anything? I'm happy to Let me see, is there anything in the chat here that I missed? Sometimes we don't have comments because everybody is sort of taking it in.
Nothing in the chat, Dinah.
What do you want?
Nothing in the chat.
Nothing in the chat right now. Um,
I'm sure
I
John
have-
has a question, because John always has questions, so.
oh, John, do you have
No.
anything to say?
Yeah, I've got something to say, which I think would resonate with Karen, and certainly resonates now in the modern world. When you got your CP, or landed up with CP, and you landed up with a brace and everything else, the attitudes of people were very different. When I say the normal population, the general population, and you quite often would find people crossing the road and not wanting to talk and going through. Now, I have a friend, well, she's more than a friend. We grew up together, and she landed up with a young lad who also had CP. He was actually born flat completely, and they resuscitated him and went through. So he then went on, and the one big thing that we learned with him, and I worked on in the UK and everything else, it's amazing how children can learn by precept and example. So I'm a polio, yes, but the struggles, the things of getting around are the same for all of us. So as I've said, if you can get a ramp put in somewhere, you've not only helped somebody who's in a wheelchair, but also the mum with the buggy, I know with their walking sticks, and people like that, and the elderly. So it all goes through. So I'm sure that there are people now looking at you in the States and further afield, because you've got at least a European and a worldwide audience here, who will be learning from you by precept and example. And the other thing was that my mother always said to me, "You can do it. You can get on with it. You can do it. You can learn, and you can succeed." If you've got people who believe in you, you will succeed no matter what. Shining example, Karen. Thank you very much for talking.
We
My
do have a-
father's motto to me was that I only had to get up one more time than I fell. And that was really what I lived with also. Alex, you have something important to say as always?
I like it. I like it.
Well, I don't know if it's as important as all that, but one of the things that I've had to deal with, especially recently, is being labeled as aggressive in a negative way. And I'm not trying to be aggressive. I'm trying to be assertive and advocate for myself. How does one deal with that kind of labeling? I've been actually thrown out of a doctor's office for asking questions that I thought were reasonable.
I hope you never went back to that office.
We had an interesting letter exchange between the management and my lawyer.
Excellent, excellent. We don't ever want to let that go. So Karen, you want to answer that? Have you been labeled aggressive? I hope.
I don't know if they said that to my face, but they certainly didn't like me speaking up.
Right.
They didn't like it. To this very day, when I go to the doctor, no doctors believe what I tell them, because I know more than they know about my
Sure. Sure.
and they don't want to hear it, and they don't want to be looked down upon because they don't know that stuff. And they don't know how to deal with a person who has a voice, who speaks up, and who talks truth to power. They don't want to hear that.
That's very true.
They're very threatened of me.
Very true.
And with what I am going through in my life, because of the DPT shot, I'm allergic to everything under the sun.
Sure.
No Western medicine doctor knows how to deal with that. So I have to do alternative therapy, and it is for the first time in over 50 years, because I was 20 years old when all of this, all my life I was allergic, but it, I am finally being able to at least eat like whatever normal people eat a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm
I
still.
had, I had an experience, and I don't know if I've shared this before, but about 30 years ago, I went to see a doctor because I was told he was the polio doctor over at the Rehabilitation Institute. And he looked at me and he looked at my leg and he said, I think I'd like to put you in a long leg brace. And I said, well, why would you want to do that? And he said, well, your knee is ultimately going to give out. I said, but I have a quadricep and I have calf muscles and I have this and I have that. So why would you want to immobilize it? And he said, well, I just think it's a good idea. And I admit to you all now, I dropped the F-bomb and I said, F no. And I left his office. I had a reason to see him in another environment about 15 years after that. And he kept looking at me and he said, you look familiar. And I said, yeah, you wanted to put me in a long leg brace. He goes, oh, you're F no. And I said, yes, I am. And he said to me, let me tell you what I learned from you. You will never, I tell doctors, you will never know as much as a polio knows about their body. You ask them, you never tell them. You say, how does this affect you? What is this about? He said, you taught me the greatest lesson I ever learned about polio by telling me that you wouldn't take that long leg brace.
So we have, I love that story, and I've heard it before from you, but it never
good
gets
story.
boring, never gets boring. We have a hand up from John, but we also have a comment from Anne in the chat.
Yeah.
Okay.
Very quick one,
Yeah.
which is actually addressed to Alex, and I
Yeah.
think Karen might want to comment. The situation is, if you actually go back through some of the medical literature, you will actually find that they talk about polio people being type A personalities.
Mm-hmm.
That means they are assertive, and that there is in fact, Alex, some paper in the medical journals about it, which doesn't talk about being aggressive, but it talks about being type A personalities. In other words, to put it in polite terms, you won't take any BS. It works from there. What I will try and do is, if I can dig it out, I will send you that paper, and you can read it. There is a counter argument in other psychological journals as well, which talks about there is no such thing as type A and type B personalities, and that paper never went for peer review, and it got published in a very minor document, in a very minor journal, without the peer review. So I think it says a lot about it.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll get that one to you, Alex.
Okay.
Thank you so
Anne?
much. Appreciate it.
Anne?
Thank you. Thank you, Karen.
Welcome.
Certainly are an inspiration to all of us. Thank you so very much. I just wanted to say that I went to a new doctor, an endocrinologist. I have osteoporosis, maybe it's now osteopenia now, through medication. And I said to this young woman, doctor, I bet you've never met anyone who had polio. And she said, you're right. I have never met anyone who had polio. So I was a little taken back by that, but I understand, I think having this group and being advocates and being able to spread the word about who we are, who we can be, and who we will be is really inspiring. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
I know.
Yeah.
There is one thing which is for Anne's information, that there was a study done at the Karolinska Institute in Stockholm, and it showed that 80% of their polio patients all had osteoporosis.
That's very interesting.
It makes sense. It makes
Yes.
sense with limited mobility.
Yeah.
With children, or when you build the bone mass. Now I did walk and I did do stairs. I don't think I ever really ran. I wasn't
No.
able to really run,
Right.
but you know, the osteoporosis showed up again
Yeah.
at menopause. The medications that I've taken have really increased the bone mass. As long as I continue on these medications, I should be more stable in terms of bone. And it's important for us because, you know, a fall that results in a break is much more serious for us.
Yes.
So
Yes.
I do advocate. My doctor is very proud of the progress that I've made over the years.
Good.
That's very nice that you have a doctor that listens.
Yeah.
I-
All right.
I-
Hans?
I did,
Yes.
I wanted to make a point, and this is coming from a person who doesn't have CP and doesn't have polio, and so it's maybe coming from a naive standpoint. But certainly for people that has CP or have it, and people have polio when they were younger, the solution was always to put a brace on you. It was that brace the right solution, or was it the wrong solution?
I think it was mostly wrong.
Are you asking?
Because it made you weaker from what Karen is saying. She
Yeah.
went into dance after that.
Right. I mean, this doctor was willing to do it to me like 30 years ago. Can you imagine the atrophy that I would have had I said yes or not fought back? And so I went all these years without having it and had a lot more strength, you know, before I lost it to all the post polio. But Karen knows what I mean.
And so
I
at
know.
the very early age, she was an
Yeah.
advocate saying, I don't want that brace.
Right.
Well, if it wasn't for Al, my teacher,
Yeah.
brace would never have come off.
Well, he took it off and you were dancing without it, right?
Right. And they only wanted to keep it on because they thought they knew better.
Yeah.
My teacher even wanted to come into the school and teach other children,
Children
and they wouldn't let him.
wouldn't let him.
He did not have a degree,
Mm-hmm.
but he,
Mm-hmm. You know, Anne, you were talking about your doctor had not seen a polio. So some of you were there to hear Dr. Hannah Wunsch speak to us, a doctor, an anesthesiologist, and a critical care doctor. And she's going to be coming to Chicago at the end of January to speak at the Grand Rounds for all of Northwestern medicine. I got her hooked up with them. And they have now asked me if I would introduce her because they said most of the doctors in that room have never seen a polio. So I get a chance to tell a little bit of the origin story, but then I get to talk about post-polio syndrome and hopefully open the door to a lot of new people and new ideas. So you know, we have to keep advocating in every way we can.
I know that sounds like so much fun.
That's fun.
Nothing like telling doctors my ideas.
So Anna, I know we're down to the last 4 minutes, so I don't know.
And there is a
Anybody else?
comment about
Yes.
the braces.
Okay.
And the comment is that there are medical circumstances where they are essential. I would, for example, I would have never got around unless I'd had braces because I am paralyzed from the diaphragm down, and with the crutches that allowed me to get around.
Yeah.
Without them, I would have never managed anything. They actually gave me mobility. The fact that they put everybody into braces medically wrong, but it's each to their own, and it has to be a medical decision at some stage or other. And it also, I think you'd agree with this, Karen, it also has to be the decision of the patient. And that patient means, if it's a child, means that their parents have to listen to them and not impose views which have come from outside and perhaps wrong sources.
exactly right.
Very true.
We have two hands up,
Okay, oh, my Carla.
Yours. I do think in the 50s, a lot of kids with CP were braced because bracing helped some children with polio. In other words, the doctors were saying, oh, we have a disability. Let's
Right.
put brace on it.
Right,
You know, that
right.
in their minds was similar to polio. And, you know, they couldn't have been further from the
True, from
No.
reality, right? Dominica?
Yes, in 2009, I had the privilege to go to India on a national immunization, polio immunization. That was the first time. I've actually done that 3 times. But I was privileged to visit a hospital in Delhi where, of course, they've been dealing with polio much more recently than countries in Europe and North America. There were children who were getting all kinds of treatment who had polio. And we saw where the braces and other things were being made within that hospital. Now, they don't use the heavy metal ones that I remember from my childhood. They have a much lighter thing. As John was just saying, in certain cases, it can be helpful, but they didn't have the big, ugly surgical boot looking footwear. They had a much more, normal looking footwear and lighter braces. So it was obviously far less traumatic for the children to be wearing those things. And if they're wearing pants that cover the braces, they're shoes like everybody else's. But they had abandoned those heavy irons. We used to call them irons.
Irons, right?
They were heavy iron looking things. So, because India has had to deal with polio for a lot longer, I think they've develop different techniques and different materials to use.
Yeah.
Which are less intrusive to the children.
Yeah, John, there were lots of new materials. Mine is made out of carbon fiber and it's pretty lightweight, so that really works. So we're getting to the end of this. And of course, John McFarland has sent me the perfect ending for this extraordinary day that we have had today, and sharing and learning so much from Karen, about Karen, and about how Karen has navigated these rough waters all her life and sits here with a smile that lights up the world. And of course, John McFarland, who I love and adore, he said that this is how he ends a lot of his things as well. At this festive and holiday season around the world, I wish you and your family all happiness, and may your God go with you.